you're going to have it memorized about as well as I do. So,
Yeah.
and if you want, I have no problem with you taking it out to wherever you go train at and stuff. So if you want to take the large suit out with you, then feel free. We, let guys demo them personally in departments and stuff. So I've got no issue. As Chief said, my name is Ryan Conley. So we're going to go over a firefighter at Cape Coral, all this stuff. Today, we're basically just going to talk about the number one risks for firefighters, both acutely and chronically. So chronic, the number one killer for firefighters is cancer. Acutely, the number one killer is overexertion leading to a heart attack. So we'll kind of break down all this stuff. The beginning of the presentation is, I think it's a little bit dry, but it's basically trying to lay a foundation for some of the chemicals and trying to explain the topics that we're going to go over. So that you guys can have a better understanding of why we're doing some of the things and why some of the preventative strategies are put into place. So, firefighter Cape Coral, I'm literally in my last class right now for my graduate degree in exercise physiology at Florida Atlantic University. With that background, obviously it comes with a lot of classes on human physiology, health, fitness, etc. And I have the ability and capability to be reading all of the literature and access documents that are behind paywalls through FAU. So not everybody can get these things unless you're paying or having a subscription to some of these companies that are publishing studies. So I'm taking advantage of that right now. And I've been a coach and a powerlifter. So I've been in the health and fitness field for 15 years, and I was a competitive powerlifter for over a decade. I was pretty good. And I'm also obviously the inventor, and we're the owners for the training gear. So today we're going to basically go over health, life safety stuff, and the primary goals that we want to get out of this is minimize the chronic and acute risks, maximize our health and longevity, honor the fallen. We all know guys that have died from cancer and have passed away, and it is not a small number of firefighters, and we'll get into those statistics in a minute. And then obviously we want to improve the fire service for the guys that are coming in below us so that we can give them a better fire service than what we inherited, only through learning more things, right? Not through anybody's fault, but of their own. So a little bit about science and studies and things of that nature. We don't want to take a single study and say that it's the absolute, it is the end all be all. You want to look at the big picture of everything and the big picture of what all of the data is showing us. And try and make an evaluation based off of the entirety of the available literature. There's never going to be a study that gives you top to bottom every single answer that you are going to be able to take and apply contextually in real life, and then vice versa. So some studies are very scientific, very minute. They're looking at things like a cellular level. Some things are randomized control trials where you have variables that are very tightly controlled, and some things are epidemiological studies that you don't have a lot of control, but you're looking at general populations and you can get a vast amount of data. So just understand that there's context behind all of these things. And one of the examples I gave here was just cleaning our bunker gear. So PAH, that's one of the chemicals we'll go over. It is a hydrocarbon that is found, it's an unburned hydrocarbon. It's found on all PPE everywhere. It's one of the most commonly studied SVOCs or carcinogenic components that can be on our gear and around us all the time. Just from changing pre-soaking time, detergent used, the temperature, and which kind of pH or SVOC they're studying, they could see a change from 20 to 50% or 50 to 80% based on changing some of those variables. So we can see a really wide variety of different statistics, even from the same study that they're just changing and manipulating a couple of these variables. So cancer in firefighters, obviously cancer is just abnormal cell growth, can create a tumor, can develop and lead to harm and or potential death. So total cancer death rates in America, of 2022, we see over 600,000 people. Cancer is the number 2 leading cause of death for general population, regular American people. Heart attacks and heart disease is by far the number 1 killer. So firefighters have actually surpassed that. We flip-flop that. So cancer is now the primary killer of firefighters compared to heart disease. And in general population, it's a pretty good gap between 1 and 2. So heart disease is pretty far out in front of cancer in those ratios. So the fact that we've caught up and that our cancer is above our heart disease while also simultaneously having higher rates of cardiovascular disease than general population is not a good statistic or direction that we want to continue to trend in.
Ryan, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, didn't you mention in at the conference that firefighting is being labeled a
Yes.
human carcinogen?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it in it? Oh,
It's on this one. So the International Agency Research on Cancer, they meet every 10 years, I want to say, and update different occupations, different chemicals. So of 2022, they reclassified firemen from Group 2B to Group 1, which is a potential or probable carcinogen to a known carcinogen, essentially. And that was based off 52 studies, 7 meta-analysis, and the meta-analysis is a combination of a ton of studies. So we see all these numbers here. Obviously, we're not, we're trending in the wrong direction with cancer. So we also see an increase for multiple different kinds of cancers, up to 1 to 1.5 times the rate of normal population. And there's just a ton of this data out there. I could have put many more studies up here. These were just a few that I threw up. And then this is actual line of duty stuff or actual death of firefighters. If you want to look at like epidemiological data. So from 2008 to 2010, just 2 years, Miami-Dade County had 32% of their firefighters diagnosed or died from cancer. And Boston Fire Department had a 67% line of duty death in a little bit over a decade. So this is a pretty staggering number. And obviously the Miami-Dade County guys, that was a different generation of firefighters. It was over, it was almost a decade and a half ago now. But we're still dealing with a similar health problem, okay? So we're gonna, yeah.
Compare this to other countries?
Similar, I'd actually have to look at that data. I have not looked at it, but firefighters in general, it could be even worse in other countries just because of, I would expect.
Gear's like, it's the same type of
Yeah.
product.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
Yeah, most of the gear is pretty much the same all around. I would say that if it's like a second or third world type country, those firefighters are probably going to be exposed to worse conditions. Right. And then I know Europe, they just have different tactics than us. Like sometimes they don't even do a lot of interior operations. So it could be, it's basically you're comparing two different populations, even though it's the same job title. So it's not exactly apples to apples, but it would be interesting to look at. And I don't know, I could look at that though, because I am curious on that now. So these are our 3 primary routes of absorption or of exposures: ingestion, inhalation, and absorption. So traditionally, we've done a really good job over the last, I don't know, since the invention of the SCBA, right? We've acknowledged that inhalation is a primary route, that it's a problem. We've tried to reduce unnecessary inhalation of toxic substances on the fire ground. Dermal absorption seems to be the missing key component that we're finding out over the last decade or so of where some of these exposures are coming from that is keeping our cancer rates elevated. Oopsies, wrong way. Down is forward. So inhalation, we're going to just touch on each of these a little bit individually. So our primary hazards on the fire ground are going to be the size of 0.1 to 10 microns in size. For reference, a dust particle is 25 microns, so we can see how tiny these inhalation hazards are. And during overhaul, well, that kind of also brings into question the warm zone, right? Like, where are we on the fire ground that we think that our respiratory tract is safe and that we might actually still be inhaling stuff? Just because you don't see it doesn't mean that we're not possibly in an area where we're being exposed. So overall, we see that 99% of the smoke during overhaul had a particle size of less than 1 micron, and also high levels of hydrogen cyanide. So, and I think guys are pretty aware of overall now. Like, we should be masked up, should be doing that on air. That's not a huge concern of mine. Obviously, I still want to touch on it just for the context, but my point on this is more of being aware of your surroundings, what actually is the warm zone, and are we good to get off air? And diesel exhaust is a common inhalation that we come across daily. So dermal absorption, primary concern is going to be fire ground. It's on our PPE, it's on our apparatus, it's in our station, personal hygiene products, etc. Some of the variables for this, dermal absorption studies are actually pretty complicated. I didn't realize that until I started looking more into it. These variables right here, so when we talked about context of studies, all of these variables matter. So skin thickness, skin temperature, sweat, the integrity, relative humidity, what chemical you're looking at. So some chemicals are hydrophobic, some are not hydrophobic. So just sweating in and of itself doesn't always necessarily mean that you are going to be having a higher intake because your pores are open. Some of these chemicals might actually run away from water, but and some go through pores, some come through hair follicles. There's a lot that goes into this. So looking at the low molecular weight, so a VOC is a volatile organic compound. When you have something that's a super lightweight molecule, for anybody that does hazmat stuff, that is like lighter than air. It easily penetrates through substances and matter. So if you're in a house fire and we're exiting a house fire, you might actually have some of these VOCs in your bloodstream prior to even getting out the door, the front door, like leaving the burn. So with that being said, some of them come in very easily, but that also means that they might off or leave easily also. And this is also the chemical that's going to be off-gassing off of our gear after you're out of the fire and we're doing decon stuff. When we say the word off-gas, that's really the main substance that we're dealing with. So heavier molecules are going to be things like semi-volatile organic compounds, flame retardants, and some heavy metals. All of them absorb through the skin, and all of them are pretty, I would say, like sticky. They're heavier molecules, so they actually like adhere to your skin and adhere to our bunker gear and other areas at a deeper level. So it's actually going into like the deep fibers of the metal, and they're slowly dermally absorbing through the skin as the longer it sits there. So what's the toxicity of the chemical? What is the dose of the exposure? How long has it been on the skin? And what type of skin is it in contact with? Is it in contact with your neck? Is it in contact with your hands? All of those are also going to dictate your exposures. Ingestion. So during fireground operations, we can accidentally ingest soot and other things. It's probably not like a main concern. I don't think this is a primary thing that's killing firefighters, but again, just something to keep in mind. Probably washing our hands on scene or as soon as we possibly can after a scene, and trying to reduce or minimize touching your face unnecessarily or around your mouth. And then getting back to the station, if you haven't cleaned up and then you're going to eat something, like you're getting that spread onto your food. And modern household hazards, we're going to look at that a little bit more in depth, just because I think that this is a topic that everybody could benefit from in America. But because we live in a firehouse, we see each other every third day, we cook, we clean, we use a lot of, we have a lot of culture in the kitchen. So changing some of our habits in the kitchen could actually benefit us as well. Guys, nice to meet you. My name's Ryan. So we're just going over some of the background cancer stuff. So just to give us a foundation on some of the risk reduction strategies for later on in the talk. So these are just some of the agents that we can come across quite commonly every day. I'm sure you're familiar with some of them, and all of these are known carcinogens. And then the vast majority on this list are also known or probable carcinogens. So I'm going to go into these a little bit deeper. And VOCs, like I discussed, those are volatile organic compounds, lightweight molecules. They're the off-gassing components. Semi-volatile organic compounds, a little bit heavier, a little bit stickier. These are the things that we really have to worry about, like long-term dermal absorption, the longer they sit on your skin. Heavy metals, same idea. And then PFAS, oil repellents, things of that nature. Everybody's familiar with that term now. And then we have flame retardants and microplastics, which are both probable at this point in time in the literature, but I expect very soonly that they will become known carcinogens here in the near future. And pH is defined. So the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, it's an incomplete combustion of a organic substance. So the example I usually like to use is it's the char that's on your steak. So when we grill a piece of meat, that char that is on the steak is really a PAH. I know it tastes delicious, but that is, unfortunately, it is a little bit carcinogenic. So they've looked at this chemical since 1775. They found that it increased cancer, testicular cancer in young males that were cleaning chimneys. So they were inside the chimneys, cleaning out the sweeps, and because they were having all three absorption routes, most likely, they were inhaling it, the soot, they were wallowing around in it and getting dermal absorption, and then they might have even been accidentally ingesting some of it. So they saw increased cancer in these young males. So this was the first occupational literature that was diagnosed from that, and we've continued to follow up these studies for hundreds of years now and see that we also have these exposures as firefighters. Another cool little fact, so firefighters, we have higher rates of skin cancer. I never really understood why that was a thing. We're not really outside much more than the common person doing, a regular job. But we see that PAHs actually increase skin cancer rates in oil petroleum refinery workers. So petroleum, all of those kind of petroleum hydrocarbon products, they have pHs in them. So when they're touching them and they're in contact with them all the time, they were seeing increased rates of skin cancer on areas that were never exposed to sunlight. So they were getting cancer spots in areas that aren't getting exposed to UV light. So that's where our elevated rates of skin cancer are probably coming from. Obviously, we can expose to them in all three routes. Dermal exposure, a 6-hour low dose of a PAH can be absorbed from 20 to 56% from this study. So that's kind of where it's important to, technical decon on scene, gross decon, get back, wash your hands, shower within the hour, because we can see that there's a good amount of those pHs, just one chemical that's going to be absorbed over a 6-hour period. We see small differences between individuals. So if you have a pH exposure and I have a pH exposure, we're pretty much going to absorb at the same rate. We do see large differences in different skin sites. So again, like we know, the neck is much more absorbable compared to like the hands or areas that have thicker skin. And we also see pHs on every single piece of PPE on the firefighter. So gloves, SCBAs, hoods, bunker gear, zippers, blah, blah, blah. This is a really cool study from England. So they basically made a statistical model looking at 1 out of 100,000 people. It's like a typical cancer statistic rate. They looked at they estimated that over a firefighter's career that 350 firefighters would develop cancer just from touching PPE contaminated with pHs. So this is just one exposure route. We're looking at dermal exposure, and then they're just looking at one chemical, which is just pHs. So that is not including that long list of other stuff of known and probable carcinogens that we looked at earlier. And there's another aspect of the study a little bit further on, which is why you guys do the decon of the apparatus. So you're welcome for that one. I'm glad to give you guys more work to do. Microplastics. Microplastics. So we see that these are reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. Like I said, this is a probable carcinogen right now. We see that it is causing cancer, organ cancer in animal studies that are ingesting phthalates or microplastics. And it's causing cell proliferation, which can eventually lead to some of the cancer. So human breast cancer, colon cancer, et cetera. That cell proliferation is really a key component to what could follow or develop into cancer cells. And then these things are also found in almost every organ of the human body. Blood, heart, kidney, lungs, placenta, testicles. And then we see that once it is in the brain, they're not really sure if it can get out. So it's kind of it's a bioaccumulation that doesn't really have a way to be excreted. So trying to minimize our chronic exposure of plastics is probably a good idea for long term. And we also see that some of these chemicals, most likely the primary mechanism is that it's disrupting the endocrine system and it's mimicking estrogen. So you have estrogen receptor sites that are meant for estrogen to bind to at a cellular level. Instead of the estrogen binding to it, these plastics are taking its place. And then they're binding to the estrogen receptor, sending a signal, and it's a messed up signal, and it's causing some of these incorrect cell metabolism and sending the wrong message to the body. So this was what they see when they look at human breast tissue that is exposed to phthalates. This was for females, and it was activating the progesterone signaling pathway. So they're not exactly sure how it's causing cancer, right? Like this is a theory, they see that this is happening and we're right now building hypotheses and they have theories on this, but they're not exactly sure of how it's happening, but it is causing cell proliferation. So again, like we said, the cell proliferation is occurring. There is a reasonable suspicion that this is going to be elevating cancer in different sites. We see phthalates are found in all bunker gear again, and to me, this was a pretty insane statistic. So pHs, we know how those are everywhere, right? If we go into any kind of fire, you're gonna have pH contamination on your gear, on yourself. Microplastics are 52 to 875 times higher than any pH that was recorded during this study. So they looked at different bunker gear samples. The phthalates and microplastics were off the charts exposure on our gear. So ultimately, over time, firefighters are having higher doses of exposure to this as well over the general population. And as we see, everything in our surrounding has some kind of plastic in it usually now. There's hydrocarbons and plastics that are just in all interior residents. So if we go into a structure fire, we're having all of these things burned off in the environment. We're walking through in the form of smoke and particles. So flame retardants. Flame retardants, I kind of paired these together again because they're probable human carcinogen. Data is trending towards becoming a human carcinogen, a known. And microplastics usually are the transportation vessel for delivering flame retardants. So they spray the flame retardants or put the flame retardants on these microplastics, however that works industrially wise. And then that is the transportation vehicle to apply them to drapes, furniture, clothing, all these things. And microplastics are also used to transport things like fragrances, which are in perfumes, soaps, things of that nature. So we'll touch on that later. But just connecting the dot on these two substances. There's a wide variety of them. PBDE is a pretty common one. PBB, they've also eliminated other ones in the past, and we see that they're going into our soil, water streams, and also in the wildlife, and they have a very hard time breaking down or getting out of their systems. So we see that some of them are obviously, that some of these exposures are outdoor, they're in the atmosphere, but we have significantly higher levels indoor than outdoor. Well, again, that affects us because we're going into interior structure fires, right? So the structure that we're going into has a highly highly condensed form of all these things. Once it's burned off, we're going into it, we're exposed to these things. So it's not just us being in the environment and coming into contact with it through our daily operations, we're literally going into a hotbed of it. Flame retardants, so this is a really cool study. 15 years, they looked at 1,100 Americans. So this is one of the epidemiological studies I was referring to. They saw that the cancer rates were elevated up to 300% higher for those that had the highest levels of flame retardants in their bloodstream compared to those with the lowest. Dermal absorption we see is probably most likely a significant pathway for flame retardant absorption. And all flame retardants are on all of our gear. They have been for years. We'll see if they continue to be used or not, but as of now, that is the minimum standard for them to be certified, NFPA certified. For firefighters, obviously, like we said, it's found in the atmosphere. It's on used and unused bunker gear because it's applied to the fabric, and then we're also getting higher doses of it when we go into the structure fire. And they're seeing that we're exposed to it at higher rates than the general public. This was from FRI in Dallas. App State did this study. So if we look over here at the right, they're looking at dermal absorption from a wristband study. They looked at US citizens in the yellow bar graph, French citizens in the gray, Italy in the orange, and then American firefighters in the blue. So we can see that firefighters were having much higher exposures from left to right. You've got PBD, which is a flame retardant, NFR, which is also a flame retardant, and PAH, which is the chemicals we've been discussing. So statistically, we're seeing we have much higher rates than the American population and definitely from the European population. PFAS. So obviously, I don't know how familiar you guys are with some of these things. I feel like it's beating a dead horse often with going over this chemical. It's gotten a lot of notoriety, which is good in the press. I feel like sometimes it's overlooked some of these other known chemicals and hazards that we have, but it's still good to understand this, and it's good to understand that we need more data on it. PFAS was created in World War II. They applied it to tanks. It is the only chemical that's ever been engineered or created that can repel oil. There's other things that can repel water. There's nothing that can repel oil. So if you want this ability, you want the ability to repel oil, that's what you use. So it's really only for industrial use now, like have to use it because it's known that it's causing problems. It's an endocrine disruptor. It has these issues. It's not supposed to be used anymore on like common items, but it should be mandated for only like must-have things. We see it on Teflon from cooking pans, and it's in a lot of our water systems. We'll touch on that. And we see that it's causing thyroid function issues, issues with the immune system, injuring the liver, and epidemiological studies showing cancer at several sites, including kidney and testicular. And they definitely had animal studies. If you guys haven't seen, what's the damn movie? It's Mark Ruffalo, Dark Waters is what it's called. It's basically the lawyer that took the lawsuit to DuPont over the Teflon and all the chemical, them dumping it into the Ohio River and all these areas around Ohio and West Virginia, I believe. So it's actually a really good movie. Got Anne Hathaway in it, so that's just good enough for me to watch. But it really is pretty accurate on the history of the lawsuit with them, and it goes over kind of this like 30-year fight with DuPont. Oh wait. Okay, I almost skipped over an important slide. So this was a new study from literally September of 2024 that I just found actually it's a couple weeks ago. So I put this into the study, or the slideshows. They looked at 3 different jackets. 2011 never used, 2008 used for 7 years, and 2019 used for 2 years. They heated the jackets up to 100 degrees to try and mimic what the highest temperature of the firefighter's skin would be inside of a fire. And they did that for an hour. They found 8 kinds of PFAS and on all 3 layers of the gear. And like we said, these are older suits. So I want to say after 2020, they started to reduce the numbers of suits that had PFAS on the exterior shell. And then most of them still have it on the moisture barrier. So the oldest jackets, the ones that had the highest use, they had the most amount of PFAS on it. So that doesn't make sense if we're just thinking that it's coming from the factory. Obviously, we're having environmental exposures. So there's PFAS that is being ignited and burned in the residential structure fire. We're going through it, and then that contamination is compounding on the gear. So we see that there's more PFAS on older gear than new gear. So just taking this out of our structure gear is not fixing the problem, because it's also in our environment now. DWR, that's like a durable water repellent. You just have to be careful with that if you're buying, shopping. If this is something that you guys are concerned about with whatever products you're purchasing, just see what kind of DWR that they're using, because it could be a PFAS, because PFAS can repel oil and water. There are DWRs that are, anything that's not a PFAS, they have chemicals that can repel just water. So you kind of got to make sure, because PFAS does everything, that they're not using PFAS as a DWR. And then we see that during fire suppression, inhalation exposure is probably going to be unlikely, because you're on SCBA, so you're probably not going to be exposed to PFAS while we're breathing it. But again, thermal absorption is most likely the predominant pathway. Something that I also like to touch on is they recommended the exposure, possible routes of exposure to PFAS. I thought it was on here. Maybe it's the next one. Basically wearing long sleeve shirts. There's a couple times in here, long sleeve shirts, long sleeve pants. If we're wearing other layers underneath our gear, that does help to minimize germal absorption. So that's one thing that we can do. I always had short sleeve shirts on, and once I started reading this, I just swapped to long sleeve all the time. I know it gets a little uncomfortable out here, it's hot, but I think it's a low cost, high yield tactic that we can do.
Regarding the DWR, if you recall, just recently one of the departments locally who got gear, and they were under the assumption that it was PFAS free, was the Lion gear, and that has DWR because they sprayed the ISO-dry system on the material afterwards, and then they have to put a new label inside the moisture barrier that states that this material contains PFAS now, because they apply the ISO-dry system.
Yeah, so there's a lot of if this then that or whatever going on with regulations and being transparent with things. We need more studies on PFAS. We do. There's not enough. I am currently and they are doing a lot of studies. Every time I turn around, I feel like something new is coming out. So I'm kind of just trying to assemble stuff to try and paint a picture, right? Dr. Orman from NC State, he's somebody that I trust quite dearly. He's a really good researcher. And right now they're looking at dermal absorption through pig skin studies, and they're trying to figure all that out. It's not out yet, it's not published. They're still conducting the study, but preliminarily he's seeing minimal absorption through the pig skin, which is similar to human, is why they're using pigs. So we'll see how that goes. And then AFFF is absorbed through the skin at about 1% from Dr. Peasley. He's the scientist from Notre Dame who brought all these studies to light to begin with a few years ago. And again, 1% is, we're not seeing, that's not a high level of dermal absorption, right? But PFAS is very toxic. So we're looking at that circular pie chart of what is the chemical's toxicity, how long are you exposed to it, what are the routes, et cetera, et cetera. So 1%, it doesn't seem like a lot, but we really don't want any of this in our bloodstream to begin with. So what does that actually mean? And that study that we just looked at, they were not able, that was not part of the scope of their study to explain what the exposure actually was. They were just saying that there is the chance for exposure, and it was there dermally and inhalation-wise. We don't know on a scale what that is. Like, is it, holy shit, we need to stop this, or is it doable? Is it a trade-off that's worth making? PFAS is found in both outer shell and moisture barrier, 30 of used and unused, yada yada. If you have an older, yeah, it doesn't even matter with you guys because you don't have older gear. If you have older sets of bunker gear that's like brand new, if you wash the coat 2 or 3 times, you're going to get basically excess level of unnecessary PFAS off the shell. Now that means it's just going into the water source, but it is getting off your jacket, and you will still have the protection of the PFAS from on the outer shell. So is it essential for us as firefighters? We have taken the shotgun approach and said, get it off our gear. That's what the manufacturers have been doing. It's a very expensive change. And if we switch to non-PFAS gear, at least for the moisture barrier, you will be in hotter gear. Silicone and the other substance, which I forget what the alternative chemical is, it's basically 2 of them, they are hotter. So the way that the PFAS works, or the brilliance behind it, the way that it works so well, is that it is this is from Dr. Warman, him explaining it to my not very intelligent self, was the chemical molecule structure is so tight that it does not allow liquids to penetrate, but it's loose enough that it allows vapors to leave. The other alternative chemicals we have, they don't do that as well. So you don't get the vapor leaving as readily. And then the limitations without having PFAS on our outer shell. I think that this is kind of a public service announcement that I'm kind of surprised that more people don't talk about. So I definitely like to go over this, is avoiding petroleum products, liquid exposure products from petroleums on your gear. So if you are having most dangerously is a diesel spill contamination. If you get diesel on you and you're in a hot zone and you are in a spot or a location that you could potentially ignite, you are flammable. So knowing that now, because that was not the case prior, PFAS would repel diesel. Now diesel is going to saturate and it spreads rapidly. So it will get all over the gear. I've seen a video of it. It would cause 3rd-degree burns to a firefighter because it will burn so long because of just the way that it's spreading. And obviously it's not it's definitely a safety and health concern. It's not a common thing that we're going to run into all the time, right? Like, I've never gotten diesel spilled on me, but it's one of those things in the back of your mind, you never know what you're going into that day. You could have a weird industrial fire or something going on where you get diesel on you on accident. If you're not aware of that, you need to get out of that area, like immediately, extricate yourself. What are the other 2? Gasoline wasn't as much of a hazard, and hydraulic fluid wasn't as much of a hazard. Gasoline burns quicker, so it seemed to ignite and it burned through more rapidly. That's why the diesel was another issue, is it burns slower and hotter. And then the hydraulic fluid was also not as much of an issue because it didn't spread very well. So primarily concern for diesel, just everyone keep that in the back of your mind and let anybody else know that is unaware of that. Heavy metals, again, all 3 routes can be ingested, inhaled, and absorbed. I just picked a couple of them that are very common, cadmium and nickel. They're in all kinds of household products. We encounter them all the time. They're basically in every structure fire as well. Known carcinogens. The UL, they collected smoke from multiple fires, and they found multitude of heavy metals found on all fire scenes. Arsenic, cobalt, chromium, lead, phosphorus, etc., many heavy metals. And they saw that 70% of those particles during the fire were, again, 0.04 to 0.15 microns in size. Dust is 25 microns in size, again, for reference. So these things are extremely, extremely small. You're never going to see it with the naked eye. And we see increased skin cancer from a variety of heavy metals through dermal absorption. So this was a study done on 3 different departments: Wisconsin, Arizona, and I want to say another one in Arizona, but it might have been New Mexico. What they found, what they looked for was what heavy metals, they tested for 4 heavy metals. So all of those heavy metals were found in the structure fires that they were going into. So they found cadmium, chromium, copper, and lead, and many more could have been tested for, but that's what they looked at specifically. So they looked at the knee, elbows, and chest. They found that the differences primarily were from the structure, so how old the building was, what the building was constructed with. That was going to kind of dictate the ratio of what heavy metals you were exposed to, and then also how you move through the environment. So if you were doing a search pattern and you're crawling through the building or doing a knee slide or whatever, that contamination is primarily going to be heavy metals. So they're going to be lower on the ground. You're going to be coming through soot and debris. And they're going to be higher on those locations. Whereas if you're walking through the building and it's maybe not that hot, the visibility is okay, you're walking through it, your frontal plane is getting hit with some of these lighter weight heavy metals. So that's where you're going to have some of these airborne particles. Basically what my point is for this is you can kind of get an idea of maybe where you should focus more of your gross decon. You get outside, you're like, all right, I was walking through the building, I should probably clean off everything frontal plane. If you're crawling through the building, focus a lot of stuff on the knee pads, your hands, your gloves get a lot of contamination on them. So you can kind of do a little bit of almost spot cleaning, if you want to call it that. And heavy metals in electrical vehicles. So we need more studies on this. University of Miami is also they'll publish a study in spring. As far as there's a lot of gases and dangerous chemicals that are released from these. There's the lithium ion component, and then there's also the heavy metal component. Both of those are combined in the battery. We see release of carbon monoxide, hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen cyanide, and then some of these heavy metals like nickel, manganese, cobalt, etc. The pilot test that they've looked at so far, this was a couple years old, I believe, they saw a presence of pH and formaldehyde that were exceeding all safety levels that they set for the bunker gear. They also saw that cobalt was 24 times higher than what they considered safe. We also will see later on that heavy metals do not come out of our gear very easily. It's probably the least effective thing that we have at washing. So this is really a big concern for the future of us in the fire service as we're dealing with more and more of these lithium ion batteries and heavy metals and things of that nature. So my general recommendation to guys is if you're within like 300 feet of a lithium ion battery fire or something, you need to be on air. That seems to, I believe that's going to be the recommendation they give in this new study that's coming out from Miami. And washing your gear, just do the best we can. Diesel exhaust. Obviously, it's a concern. Well, it's not a primary concern, but it's a chronic thing, right? We're breathing it quite often. We get up in the truck, drive to calls, check off our engines, looking at grabbing the EMS bags. Our exhaust pipe is literally right next to our medical compartment. So every time we hop out on a call, we're going to the most common compartment door we have to open, and we're getting hit with a ton of exhaust. Probably not the smartest idea, right? So small things like that, being aware of that, and having plenty of studies now that are pretty much saying that diesel is a carcinogen. Shift work and sleep deprivation. So this doesn't get touched on enough for a variety of issues within the fire service. So shift work is known as a known human carcinogen now since 2016. It is seen, so these studies were done on young college age students, I believe males. So sleeping less than 7 hours per night versus 7 to 9 hours per night, we saw a 30% decrease in the activity of the natural killer cells. If we slept 4 hours per night, we saw a 72% reduction in the natural killer cell activity. This is important because the natural killer cell is the body's primary immune cell that kills off precancerous cells, pathogenic cells, bacteria, things of that nature. This is your body's first line defense, right? Our natural killer cells are some of the most important immune cells that we have, and they do a ton of work. So if we're inhibiting their effectiveness, this is causing us to not be able to fight some of the exposures, the higher level of exposures that we're exposed to. We want to try and figure out ways to try and improve our sleep any chance that we can get, really. So cancer in firefighters, as we can see, is a multifactorial high definition problem. It is not a simple thing. There's a lot that goes into this stuff, and we're getting bombarded from a lot of different angles. So I'm literally just trying to present that this is not a simple solution, and it's not a silver bullet. There is no one thing that we can do in the fire service. It's just gonna stop us from getting cancer, aside from maybe preventing fires from ever happening. So if we have some technology that can do that, then that might help us out a little bit. So what we want to do is basically try and figure out ways to reduce those 3 routes of exposures over our long career, because we're going to be here for a long time, and we're going to try and figure out different strategies we can use to try and minimize our chronic exposure. So the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I think that really fits well in this topic and in this study, because like I said, there's no one silver bullet. So what are the small things that we can do to try and make this better and make that better and make improvements here and there? Cancer screening should be a baseline minimum for every department. I know that you guys do some screening in your, they told me the company yesterday, but I know you guys have a system going on. So that's honestly a standard, because cancer prevention is really simple, or not simple, I'm sorry. Cancer prevention is much easier, and diagnosis is much easier the sooner you catch it. So survival rates, treatment rates, they're all much, much better the sooner you can diagnose and the sooner you can catch it. So the following things are all additional strategies that we can use that is not trying to overlook that. So inhalation. Our boy Bill, he tried marijuana, but he did not inhale. We're gonna try and do the same thing. We're gonna try not to inhale. So this is a study from Arizona. There's a couple of their concepts that are sprinkled in throughout this presentation. So they looked at 28 total fires. So they had a good amount of data here, good amount of fires. They saw that driver engineers were exposed to benzene, PHs, post-fire. When they put on their SCBAs, they saw a 40% reduction in these urinary metabolites. So what they were excreting out through the urinary tract from exposures, they saw a 40% reduction in these pHs. That's pretty good. That's pretty good in my opinion. I think that's interesting. What they instructed the engineers to do was, when you get on scene and you feel like this, as soon as you feel comfortable putting your pack on, do that. So most likely, if I were to imagine, they probably pulled up on scene, put the truck in pump, got their guys their water, did what they were supposed to do, and then went on air, if I were to read through between the lines with this. We also see, obviously, wearing SCBA during overhaul and ventilation, decon, wear it as much as we can on scene, as much as practical. So this was a wildland firefighter study. They looked at half masks. They did see reductions in pHs, metabolites, and reduced respiratory irritation, less coughing. It was a small sample size, but they did get good results from the firefighters that did wear this in wildland firefighting. So there are some other studies that I would like to look at more that looked at other chemicals. As far as pHs go, organic substances, the half mask is definitely a viable strategy to utilize for inhalation protection there. So when the gear is off gassing, this is after the fire. You guys have a good system. You guys don't put your gear back in the cab directly after you're returning from a fire. That's probably the best case scenario, is just confinement, right? Separating it from you. So if that is not the case, we also see things like VOC fans. So we're test running one of these at Cape right now. So they're basically trying to, the fan's trying to suck up these VOC particles quicker and expel them. So instead of taking 60, 70, 90 minutes to off gas naturally into the air, the VOC fan is actually speeding that process up and doing it in about 10 minutes. They also have fans that you can put in the bunk room and in the the gear room, and then also in your station room, your bunk room. So I thought that was a pretty neat thing. I'm friends with these guys, so I try and let guys know that this is a possible strategy as well, to just try and keep the air clean. Station. So station dust and having a dirty station. Unfortunately, the fire stations have higher levels of pHs, flame retardants, and known and unknown PFAS in our dust. So it's not just, we're getting it from all angles, right? So my recommendations on this, again, thoroughly clean the station, clean the bunk rooms. If you see dust sitting around, I try and get on the probies and I'm like, hey, this is not just a you know, you're a probie and you need to be cleaning thing. This is also a safety concern for us and everybody here. So you have 20 years, 25 years of just breathing this stuff in. It's just, he told me he cleaned all the time yesterday. All the time.
Texts are gonna be now.
So diesel exhaust, same idea. Try and minimize unnecessary idling. If you're checking off the truck, put it in pump, turn it off after you're done to check off the rest of your equipment. Utilize natural wind, exhaust catchers, things like that.
Do you guys use,
Do it twice a day.
we were talking about, we brought it up in one of our meetings here, diesel being right there at the medical.
Yeah.
Do you guys turn your trucks off?
We don't. We probably should. We're actually, they're trying to, on our ladders and the ladders and trucks, they're trying to reroute it. Well, I'm like, yeah, but why don't we do it for all the apparatus? 'Cause it's on the engines that way also.
Yeah, we talked about changing
The compartment.
the compartment.
Yeah. I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
Turning off is not a huge deal. You know?
Yeah. It's just always that fear of you're like, well, what if it doesn't start back up? We got the on-call mechanic. I mean, that's why we don't turn them off, right? I would assume. So.
Supposed to run them at high idle when you stop too.
So I think probably changing the compartment is probably the best idea. But yeah, that is it's kind of like one of those obvious things that you're like, why are we doing this? This doesn't make sense. There's no logic. But yes, we're trying to also navigate that minor exposure that is unnecessary. So with the inhalation stuff, wear your SCBA quickly and as often as possible. If you are a driver, throw it on as soon as you can. Obviously, it's a little bit different with you're an incident commander, battalion chief, you're on scene trying to have good radio comms with guys. I think technology will get around to where we should be able to do that. If you're standing in front of a structure fire and you know, moving guys around, there's no reason to me that we can't protect your inhalation. So trying to figure out the best way to do that, I think it's a possibility. It's obviously easier said than done with technology right now when you can barely understand what anybody's saying on these mics, but there should be a solution for that. Wear a half mask if the SCBA is not a viable option. Reduce, obviously, like we said, the unnecessary diesel exposure. You can use these ionizing fans if you so choose. Definitely clean the station and don't stand in front of a structure fire for a post-incident analysis. That's probably one of my biggest pet peeves is when we do stuff like that and it's just unnecessary. Like, just move it down the road. It's not that big a deal. We're standing right next to the engines with huffing more diesel exhaust and standing in front of an off-gassing structure. That's not smart. Ingestion. Like I said, this isn't like a huge concern of mine. It is a concern. Accidental ingestion of carcinogens on the fire ground. You're wiping your mouth, bring it back to the station. You're not washing your hands, yada yada. We can see how this could be a possible exposure route. Use common sense. Wash your hands. And this is going to be some of the stuff that I'm going to go a little bit deeper on. This could be a whole class in and of itself. So in our kitchen, in our everyday lifestyle, there's things that we can just make minor adjustments, minor tweaks with. Replacing plastic Tupperware with glass containers. So these plastic Tupperwares, a lot of the microplastics are obviously what produce a plastic. So replacing that and using glass is going to prevent some of these microplastics from leaching into your food, especially if the food is hot or the plastic is hot. That's actually increasing the absorption rate, so it is going to be moving into the food easier. So swapping, same idea with bottles, trying to use metal bottles instead of plastic bottles if it's your personal stuff, shaker cups and things of that nature. Do not microwave plastic bottles, do not drink plastic bottles that have been heated. Reduce processed food consumption. So unfortunately, processed food in and of itself, it's not the devil. Yes, it's typically higher calorie dense, but basically the packaging, as far as this stuff is concerned, that's typically what we see, higher levels of microplastics, PFAS, things like that are used to either repel water or repel oil, keep the product to last longer. So things like that, and then obviously they're typically wrapped in plastic in some sort. Dust and vacuum, same concept as before. Reduce sprays. So if you have a aerosolized spray with whatever, PAM or whatever, that aerosolization is from a petroleum byproduct or from a petroleum product. That's where you get the propellant from. So you're spraying petroleum with your olive oil or whatever you're using with an aerosolized version. And typically inside those cans are also more PFAS, microplastics, etc. So try and use Oils that are in glass containers, specifically if you can get darker glasses, that also helps extend the longevity and the life of it. Less oxidation, less UV light is penetrating into bottles that are like dark. So dark green bottles, things like that instead of clear, if you have the option. Just fun facts, because I know that's what everybody came here for, is what kind of olive oil you need to be using. And then the non-stick pans, that's a big deal. Opt for ceramic, cast iron, stainless steel, etc. I know you guys have ceramic stuff now, so good switch. And then we can see up to 15,000 parts per million just in a microscopic scratch on a Teflon pan. So there are exposures of things from these products that, again, we aren't necessarily seeing with our naked eye, but they're there, unfortunately.
The other thing too, Ryan, is that the foods that you guys might get from different distributors, they come in a little black plastic.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the worst.
Yeah, I did touch on that
So
yesterday.
that's
Yeah.
literally the worst thing you could do is the black plastic ones, is putting it in the microwave, heating it up on that, just transfer it to a glass, put it on a plate, put it in the microwave, do it that way.
Same as those.
So Shane has no
factory
chance
meals.
then.
Exactly. Take it out of
Live in
the,
the
Yeah.
any type of black plastic has
So you have no chance.
the worst part of it.
It's from recycled electronics.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's the black plastic is recycled electronics and then other recycled plastics. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. So just transfer it over. That's the quickest way to deal with it.
Oh, and while we're on the plastic stuff, so you guys know the super clear plastic versus that like cloudy looking plastic. The cloudy looking plastic Tupperware, that actually has less microplastics and less phthalates in it. The phthalates, they put more phthalates in it to give it that clear, pristine look. So actually, if you have a clear, pristine looking piece of plastic, that's actually dirtier than than like a cloudy piece. Yeah. So.
Throw away that whole cabinet full of
There's 400
Yeah.
kids in 20 containers.
Yeah, you might as well throw them out.
Throw them all away.
So using for here and also at home and stuff, also using like paper wax, aluminum foil, things like that to hold stuff is actually also a good recommendation. So like we touched on before, char is basically pH. It's a pH that's on your grilled meat. So this study looks at basically what you could marinate your meat with to try and to see how that affects the meat. So what they found was if you use some kind of a citrus, like a lemon marinade is what they used for the basic citrus protocol, they saw a 70% reduction in pHs on the steak. So that's kind of cool. And then you also notice that they advised to not use cooking oils on a steak. So the cooking oil on the steak actually is going to raise the pH value, and we're going the wrong direction there. So try and use a citrus if possible. And then also, honestly, I used to love grilling. I find myself using the air fryer more and more. So I think that actually has less char on it. You're not really using the same kind of heat source. So you've got other options, but just if you're a big griller, I know a lot of stations, everybody hops on the grill. So lemon or citrus marinade is a good alternative. Doesn't matter how long you marinate it for. Drinking water, this is a nationwide study. They had 3 labs conducting water samples for over 6 years from over 700 drinking sources throughout the entire country, both private and public. And they had 45% of these samples had some level of PFAS in it. And if that level of PFAS was found, then it was above the safety standard that was set for water contamination. So these were the sites that they looked at. There's some I think there's like one in Lee County area-ish, and then a bunch in Tampa, and then North Florida, Orlando area, it looks like. So you can pull these up if you'd like to, but for minimizing the PFAS in the drinking water, the most effective way is definitely an RO system, so a reverse osmosis. The only problem with reverse osmosis is it takes everything out of the water, so you're also taking the minerals out. So just be aware of that. And the activated carbon filter is a second option. That's the one that I use. It's a cheaper alternative. It actually makes the water taste really good. It works very well. So activated carbon filters are definitely a viable option. They're not as efficient, like I said, as the PFAS. They don't filter out as small of the part. I'm sorry, as the RO system. They don't filter out every single thing like an RO does, but it does do a very good job of taking out PFAS, taking out estrogens that are in the water, different things of that nature. And like I said, it makes the water taste much better. So that's a very affordable option. I think the filter is like 40, 50 bucks, and then you just have to install a system either under your sink or just on the entire house. So it's very doable. And like I said, yeah, RO is just a little bit more expensive, but both of them are great options. So our ingestion summary: wash your hands, try and minimize touching your face unnecessarily on the fire ground, shower within the hour, water filters, replace your kitchenware, plastic containers, non-stick pans, sprays, etc. Reduce processed food intake, vacuum, dust, and clean the station. Don't microwave or consume from heated plastics, and marinate your grilled meat in citrus.
You could have just showed that slide first.
That one first? Yeah, it's true. I should. All right, boom, boom. Yeah, Mo is actually.
That's not what
Do
it
you?
sounded like.
I know, so I heard butthole.
That's what I heard. I'm like, what are we talking about?
Moho's
Eat that?
Moho tastes much better.
Edit that part out there.
So, so some of the dermal absorption stuff. This is a cool study that that I pulled up. They need to replicate this again, but it makes sense. So upon exiting the structure fire, they saw that quickly unzipping your coats and your turnout pants actually allowed some trapped benzenes and other VOCs to off gas sooner. So we were seeing levels that were the same inside of the coat as outside of the coat when you were exiting the structure fire. So those the particles were trapped between you and the coat, and they had nowhere to go. So off gassing, opening up, that's going to allow those particles to get out between you sooner. Between you and the gear sooner, and it's going to reduce some of the dermal absorption. And the whole time we're still staying on air, right? So we're not really changing our gross decon procedure. We're just doing one more step prior to going to get washed down. We do need future research on this, but intuitively, this makes sense to me. I think it's a good practice. It seems like a very good idea. Gross decon, you guys know the deal with this, obviously. Green buckets, use soap, water, use soap and water, please, not just water. And then scrub as hard as you can on some of the gear. It does do a very good job of removing the surface level pHs and other contaminants. So when we look at these numbers for here in technical decon, again, we're just looking at surface level. Anytime they do like a wipe sample study, you're looking at surface contamination. That is not dermal absorption that is like at a deeper level or the deep fiber of the gear, etc. They're just looking at the surface level of the contamination. So skin wipes, 54% reduction in pHs off the skin surface. These are also an underutilized tool. Just if you can't get back to the station, which like you guys are only a 2-station department, you're not able to have the first due leave sooner or whatever. Like you guys have to be on scene and finish what you're doing. Overhaul, hanging out for the fire inspector, whatever's going on. Use the skin wipes while you're there. You're sitting around, standing around, you're pretty much done. Everybody's just hanging out doing stuff. Try and use the skin wipes sooner than later. So that can give you a better buffer because you're not able to maybe get back into the shower within that hour rule. Decontamination of the apparatus, you guys are super familiar with, you're welcome. Prevent dermal absorption of pHs. The same statistical study, 230 out of 100,000 firefighters over their career could get cancer just from touching the apparatus. In particular, the interior. It was also the exterior, but the interior is what I focus on this because we don't really do the best job of chronically cleaning the interior. Most crews you guys decon after a fire, like inside the cab. Sometimes not. And like, I feel like it's hit or miss. Some guys do a really good job of wiping down the interior, wiping down the seats, the armrests, etc. That's really what you need to focus on here is just anywhere that you have direct skin contact with the apparatus, the interior. So if you're the driver, you've got your right armrest, the lieutenant on the left armrest, maybe the neck, the back of your head, those areas where you don't have like a t-shirt or a pair of pants or whatever, you have direct skin contact, that's where we should probably focus the technical decon aspect of cleaning the cab.
Have you looked into filters for the AC inside the?
Not filters in particular, but the VOC fan thing, we've looked at that. Filters as far as just the air filter for the cab itself.
AC, yeah.
I do not. What are you guys looking at with that?
No, I'm
Just in general. I know changing the filter, that would work well, yeah. Because that kind of gets overlooked oftentimes. We notice a difference when the mechanics actually change the air filter on our cab and stuff. So that's definitely a viable idea to be regularly doing that. So station wear under our PPE. touched on this earlier. We see that short sleeve and shorts and t-shirts, those are going to have a little bit more absorption from pH metabolites than if we were to wear long sleeve shirt, long pants. Then we see that the base layer worn beneath the jacket could play a significant role in minimizing direct dermal contact, and risks of dermal absorption as a route of exposure are under investigation. So that is from one of the PFAS studies from earlier. So we do see that this is a viable strategy for multiple chemicals, so PFAS and pHs. And again, obviously it kind of makes sense on the surface, right? We're just putting another layer between ourselves and the bunker gear in the atmosphere. And then also, if possible, depending on the department, if you have the funds, if you have the t-shirts, if you're in a legit structure fire, I have so many t-shirts and BDU pants that I don't care anymore. I'm just throwing that out. If we're on an actual fire and I was inside and I'm actually working, I'm tossing that in the garbage. I've got new shirts. There's no point in me trying to wash that and get that clean or cross-contaminate that with my other clothes. It's a $20 or $30 t-shirt, and the department gives us a uniform budget. Not everybody's in that situation. I understand that. The guys from Tallahassee were like, we get multiple fires a day sometimes. They're like, I don't have enough shirts to do that. So if that is not a viable option, washing the clothes in as hot as water as possible with as much soap as you can possibly do without it spilling over onto the floor is the way to handle that. Sweating. This is a freebie. So saunas, this was also from the Arizona study. Saunas showed reduction of 40% urinary metabolites of pHs after a structure fire. Again, this was a small sample population. So when you look at this study, it actually says that it doesn't reach statistical significance because they only had like 5 guys in the study. But 40% is real. That is a real reduction in urinary metabolites. So they used a sauna. You don't have to use a sauna. You just need to sweat, right? We also see flame retardants are eliminated via sweat and blood, not in the urine. And a freebie you're also getting is reducing pesticides. So sweating is a very underrated tool to use for cancer risk reduction because you could be exercising, which is also a cancer risk reduction tool, and you're sweating and excreting any chemical that is going to be that is viably excreted through the sweat glands. It's not all of them, but we are seeing some here that are important. Yes. What else on this? There's something else.
I raised a question yesterday regarding it aerosolizing inside of the
Oh, yeah.
And there be possibly that now you're going to breathe in the
VOCs or, yeah.
VOCs that you're sweating out.
So that was a good point. Yeah, that was a good point. I'd have to look into that, and it's a complicated question. Basically, yeah, if you're sitting in there in a hot sauna and you're sweating that out, if the sweat is hitting the ground, now it's evaporating, are you going to be breathing that in? I'm like, oh man, we're good. I don't remember.
No, there's got the mic.
How was it? Did you say Aryan?
It sounds like an Aryan question.
It was down the rabbit hole, and I was like, oh man, I got to think about that. And my answer to it obviously was, well, just go work out, because then you're not in a temperature hot enough to be possibly turning water into vapor. So.
That was sea shit, yeah.
No.
Do you have anything else on that? UV protection, obviously it's not our primary hazard for skin cancer as firefighters, but it is a hazard, right? Especially for pasty people like myself. UV protection, if we're going to utilize it, try and grab something that is a zinc-based product. So zinc is gonna not have any of the, it's gonna be phthalate free. So zinc is the primary mechanism behind it. And when I put this stuff on, it basically like paints yourself literally like a wall paint. So I think it just literally reflects sunlight because it's accumulating a layer of paint on my skin. Phthalate-free personal hygiene products, soaps, body washes, deodorants. So like I said before, when you have something that is a fragrance, whether it's a cologne, almost every single soap on the market, things that are even some candles, most candles, if it says it's a fragrance and it is not having a natural fragrance like fruits of some sort or kind, or mineral oils, it is typically going to be having that fragrance delivered via microplastics. So microplastics are the primary mechanism to deliver that smell to our nose. So things like Kirkland Soap Bar, they're cheap. They're at Walgreens, CVS. They're all over the place. They've been around forever. Native is a newer product. Me and him use that. We're fancy. We're bougie. I think that stuff that works really well, smells good. I like it. It's a little bit, I think it's like $10 a bottle, so it's kind of expensive. But Dr. Squatch deodorant, also
It still has a fragrance in it.
they have a fragrance. So when you look at that, it's a citrus, so it comes from fruits. And I think they say phthalate free on it also. I've looked at the bottle. It's actually, but it's a good point. You have to look at these things. Sometimes they can try and trick you with stuff. I was using a deodorant for years. I've been aware of this stuff for 5 years. I was using a deodorant that I thought had everything that I was looking for, and it did not. So I literally just switched to Dr. Squatch the other day because it was one of those things where I was like, I'd already checked the box off in my head. And I'm like, oh, I'm good. This is aluminum free, doesn't have anything else in it, blah, 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 whatever. So that was not even on my brain. And then somebody brought it up and I looked at it again and I'm like, oh crap, this actually does have stuff in it. So yeah, you can get got pretty easily with this stuff. But that would be my tools or recommendation is things like that is.
Native and Dr. Squatch have both. So you can get their deodorant or.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And they have hair stuff too. So
Yeah, they have a ton of products.
From them to protect yourself throughout the whole wash.
Yeah, they've got a ton of products. We should get a Dr. Squatch sales contract or something. Probably make more money. Conventional gear extractor washing machine. So, do you guys have these at the station, or you guys get them sent out? Yeah. So most places have an extractor. It's definitely better than nothing. I tell everybody to use it as soon as you can. Wash your gear. Wash your gear. We see that it's not as effective as we would like it to be. So NFPA certified washing techniques done at NC State, they saw an average of 68% removal of SVOCs. Probably, I don't want to say generous. There's different studies all over the place. And again, you'll see different numbers looking at different chemicals, different ways that they clean it, et cetera. But overall, the literature basically concludes that it's not super effective at cleaning. It's better than not cleaning it. Don't get me wrong, do your technical decon, clean, gross decon, wash your gear. You have to do this. It's just that can we make improvements? So heavy metals we see are not passing cleaning for a gear extractor. Heavy metals are very hard to get out of the gear, like I said before. It's not even, so NFPA's rating for a clean set of gear is it cleaning 50% of the chemical that it was exposed to. Yeah, so it has to pass 50%. Phthalates are not removed effectively, so plastics don't come off of it effectively. We saw that with it being up to 800 times higher than pHs on the gear. Does not remove flame retardants effectively, and even some of the pHs, I forget the kind of chemical that it is, but it's really bad at certain chemicals that are, this is better at hydrophobic. So hydrophobic chemicals, those chemicals that the gear extractor is not good at cleaning are hydrophobic chemicals. You're using a aqueous wash, so you're combining water with a chemical that doesn't like water. So these liquid CO2 machines, kind of the new kids on the block, I think they started off in NASA, the original technology to clean spacesuits. They've eventually kind of branched their way into the fireground bunker gear cleaning. And we see a really good increased efficiency rating in cleaning SVOCs and phthalates from the gear. So those are the chemicals that are hydrophobic that the gear extractor is not good at cleaning out. So this is a good strategy to clean those. We see a small improvement in PFAS, and then it passes the NFPA rating. So these SVOCs and phthalate study, that's from Dr. Orman at NC State. These other studies are from the private company, so they're not peer-reviewed literature, but you would also lean to think that that's also their study is done on their own product, so they're going to give you it in the best light, and those are our numbers we're coming up with. So a little bit better than the extractor at heavy metals and PFAS, but not a ton. And also PFAS, they're measuring 4. There's a ton of them. All right, so they're just picking a couple of them. We see as low as 60% in the 4 that they picked, and as high as 90%. Limitations, we're not sure how effective it is at removing large debris. It was kind of compared to almost just doing a gross decon, was at least the available literature now. We do need more studies on this. And the cost of the machine is astronomical. It's up to $1 million for a liquid CO2 machine.
$1 million?
Yeah, so it's unfeasible for almost any department to buy that. Yeah, and unfortunately, the grants right now, the grant writers don't, or not the grant writers, but the grant readers don't really know what this even is. So they've gotten a lot of, they're not getting a lot of results because it's really not understood what it is and why it's so expensive, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of
Used for, what was it made for?
cleaning astronaut suits, and I think it was also used for something with farming. I don't remember how it was in agriculture, but I want to say it was something in agriculture, and it was definitely used in NASA. I think that's where the technology was created. It's expensive. Well, the good news is Bradenton, I think it's called EDT. I always forget the company up there. There's a company that has one. They are, you can send the gear out to them. They'll wash it for you for like $100 and get it back in like a week. So we did talk about this yesterday. I would recommend doing it like after a really bad fire, or maybe just once or twice a year, just semi-annual cleaning, just send it out. And then obviously the remainder of the time, just use your extractor. Yeah. Yeah, he knows about it.
Locks out in certain sections.
I got a text. I got to answer this. So this is our free commercial. This is just on the training gear. Obviously, this is where the gear fits in. It'll reduce dermal absorption unnecessarily during training, fire ground drills that are not IDLH atmosphere, and it should extend the frontline performance of your gear also. So that's him right there. That's. I don't know why I felt like I was like I don't know why I wanted to put that picture in there, but I'm like I just want to put somebody suffering. So that was actually out in Texas. That was a small department.
I said, Johnny, the gear's too hot. Someone's at the door.
So dermal absorption summaries, decon, gross technical, get it done. Wash your bunker gear. Wear long sleeve shirts and pants under our gear. Throw out your station wear if possible after a fire. Off gas after exiting the structure fire prior to going to gross decon. Don't come off air. Minimize time and gear unnecessarily spent. Excrete certain chemicals via sweating, and use sunscreen and different personal hygiene products that are fragrance free and phthalate free. So these are just a few lifestyle things that are, they don't fit into the bubble of dermal and ingestion reduction and all those things, but they are just overall strategies that are absolutely important. So 30 to 40% of cancers are estimated to be preventable via healthy diet, physical activity, and maintaining a normal body weight. As we'll see here, a body weight and obesity is actually an independent risk factor to cancer. So that means alone on it by itself, it will increase cancer rates. So we see exercising is a very effective strategy. We can reduce any variety of cancers from 12 to 21%. And it does so by modulating the immune system, modulating inflammation. We see an increase in those natural killer cells. So between 50 to 200%. I think I've read another study recently where they were seeing even higher. This is an acute change. So not always are we looking at acute changes in physiology and thinking that it's going to make a chronic or like an actual long-term adjustment. But with that being said, in our certain position, I think that any kind of an increase in natural killer cells for us is probably a good thing, even if it's only for a few hours. So activations of genes, we also see increased mitochondrial health, improved glucose tolerance, insulin resistance. All of these things are also important just for long-term health and to also kind of stave off some of the cancer issues, because a lot of times improper mitochondrial function and these glucose tolerances can kind of lead into or they're not positively affecting cancer. They're making it or exaggerating it, making it worse. Okay. And regular exercise, we see the risk of developing breast cancer reoccurrence, and that's also going to be used for firefighters that have already had cancer. So I've had some of these lectures lately and they're like, this is awesome, it's all preventable, but what do we need to do for guys that have already had cancer? They're fighting, getting back to a healthy life. Cancer is also reduced when you exercise, or cancer reoccurrence is reduced when you exercise. And then maintaining a body weight. All right.
Get in while you're pointing.
Well,
They're friends, I promise. It's weird, but
it's almost 11. You guys want to take a 5-minute break? Take a breather? All right. Well, needs to be, so am I close enough? These are just some of the ways that exercise can help lower cancer risks. Immunity, reduce inflammation, healthy digestion, hormones, and balancing a healthy weight. So nutrition. This is, again, this could be a whole class on this. We typically don't eat very well at the firehouse. And I'm big on adding more so than subtracting food from guys. I'm not a huge tell you how to eat type of person. I prefer looking at macronutrients, making sure that you're just not overeating stuff unnecessarily, eat the right amount of protein, blah, 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 all these general recommendations, right? But adding fruits and vegetables is a really easy thing to do. Adding that to every single meal, that will help get your fiber intake up. And then also we have some particular fruits and vegetables that have components inherent to them specifically, like cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, turnips, etc. And then anthocyanins, which are any kind of dark colored fruit or vegetables. Blueberries is a common example. They have factors of their own that kind of have a propensity to help reduce cancer, precancer cells, and things of that nature. So they're kind of a unique little tool that you can utilize. But fiber in and of itself, regardless of where it comes from, it doesn't have to be from one of these sources. We see a 17% reduction in colon cancer and other intestinal cancers. Intestinal cancer is a big issue in the fire service. So guys do have colon cancer. That is one of the things that we see an increased rate of. For females, 25 grams a day in fiber. For males, about 40 grams a day. You are not going to hit these on accident, I promise you. If you're just eating what I would say a standard American diet, and you're not intentionally trying to hit fiber or pick foods that are high in whole wheat, fruits and vegetables and things of that nature, adding it to your foods, you will not hit it. Dietary fiber is important. It's also a prebiotic. So everybody's talking about gut health and all this stuff right now. Fiber, again, is often overlooked. It ferments in the gut, and it creates things that are short-chain fatty acids. These short-chain fatty acids help to improve the intestinal fortitude, aid in the homeostasis, and also they're helping the immune system of the gut. So that is going to help prevent cancer in the colon and the small intestines, all of these areas. And like I said, again, we see another thing that can be used to help reduce body weight, which is an independent risk factor for cancer. So I know that what's the deli shop over here? You guys, everybody eats there a lot? No, not everybody. No? Some people, whatever. Just making sure that maybe getting a salad on the side. I'm not telling you to not get a sub. Eat what you would like to eat, but add the fruits and vegetables to your plates. Make sure you're getting enough protein, hydration, all that kind of normal stuff. But adding food is better, just instead of telling guys to completely swatch and become a vegan.
Next slide.
This one is everybody's favorite. So, unfortunately, I know I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Alcohol is a toxin. I don't know if you guys know this, but just for one drink a day, we do see a rise in cancer statistically. So, varying from 4% to a 25% increase in a variety of cancers just from one standard drink a day. I know it sucks. It does include beer. So, I'm sorry, just to let you guys know, as far as cancer risk reduction, I cannot sit up here and say it's okay to drink. For other stuff, maybe like heart disease, 1 or 2 drinks a day, there is arguments for those things, and just a general healthy lifestyle. As far as cancer risk reduction is concerned, there's really no room for that. Tobacco products, everybody signed their little tobacco paper, so nobody does that here. And vape pens, just please don't do those. They're not manly, they're not cool, and my throat hurts really bad if I have to have secondhand vape pen ingestion from some guy that I don't want to insult too much. But anyways, body weight, touching on this one more time, just showing the stats on it. Increases in risk for BMI. So BMI is like one of these epidemiological studies. It's a very easy number to get. You take somebody's height, take somebody's weight. You can get a pool of entire all of America pretty easily, right? You just need 2 numbers. So it's not a very invasive thing. It's not a very specific thing, but the number is used as a kind of a shotgun approach to see if somebody's overweight or not. When we see increases in BMI, we can have an increase of 5 to 50% for a variety of different cancers. Okay, so this is why having and maintaining a healthy body weight is very important. Sleep. So we're going to touch on 2 components of this: the department's responsibilities and the individual firefighter's accountability and responsibilities. Trying to reduce and eliminate unnecessary sleep interruptions. It is important. Utilizing government assistance programs for frequent flyers or people that might be abusing the 911 system. Obviously, every department's going to look a little bit different with some of this stuff, but are we actually providing a We're providing a service. Yes, that is correct. But are the people we're providing the service to, are they actually getting what they need to be getting to actually help them in the long term? Or are we just a Band-Aid that they're using right now? So are they following up with their physicians? Are they getting their medications? Do they need help from the United Way or physical therapy? Like, there's a ton of things that we can use resource-wise to try and guide citizens and the public to actually have better follow-up and reduce some of the 911 emergency calls. Improving technology, so improving dispatch. Me and Chief, we obviously I've worked with you guys yesterday and today, so I've seen the tone system. You guys are having a little bit of a delay with the speakers compared to when you're getting it on the phone. So things like this, these are things that we need to try and improve upon. And a lot of it's out of our wheelhouse. We're relying upon other companies, but at least getting that ball moving forward to be like, hey, what can we improve this technology to try and also improve our health and longevity, to filter calls appropriately? Is it going to the right place? Are we getting the call at the right time? All these things are helping the community and also helping us. Individual room tones. We didn't talk about that. Do you guys have, well, it doesn't, oh yeah, you guys have two apparatus here. Do you guys both get woken up?
Yes.
So things like, we are finally switching to this at my department. I've put in for this in 2017. So getting the technology like Phoenix Systems and others do it as well. But basically you can select what apparatus you're on to get toned out to only that unit instead of getting woken up for the other unit also. Just don't discourage naps. Allow guys to have a safety nap every day when they need it. And obviously, the schedule is what the schedule is. We are a emergency response. There is somebody that is going to have to respond to an emergency at odd times, disrupting sleep. So improving sleep schedules the best that you can. The less you work, the less some of these risks are. It just is what it is. So a 24/72, as far as I'm aware, is the least amount of days you come into work. Obviously, it's not a possibility or a viable alternative for many departments, such as yourselves, such as us. A lot of places just can't afford to hire a D shift. But essentially, you're getting the idea, right? So use your scheduled leave and take a. While we're on that, we do see guys that work over, I want to say, I don't want to mess the number up. I want to say like 12 shifts a month. Once you start crossing over about that mark, it might be 12 or 13. They do see gradual increases in blood pressure. So it's a chronic elevation of stress, and basically just from being at work, even if you're not, you know how it is when you work a double. Like by the time the 48's over, you're ready to get out of here. Like you're just pent up. There's just a low grade of chronic stress going on because we're always kind of on edge waiting for a call or whatever. You're just not as comfortable as you are at home, right? So they have seen that. The guys that take a ton of overtime or work a ton, they do have chronically higher blood pressures, and that could just be from stress or whatever, but it is a thing. So individual accountability, for the firefighter, take your shift, take your off shift sleep seriously. So if you were coming into work the night before, try and get to bed at a decent time. If you got your butt kicked on the night prior, try and get to bed and get a good amount of sleep that night. Improve sleep hygiene habits, so reducing bright light exposure at least an hour before bed. So melatonin is secreted naturally. Once you stop seeing bright lights or blue lights, etc., after an hour. So if you're laying in bed on your phone, you're looking at your phone and then you put your phone down to go to sleep, your natural melatonin production is not going to really occur until another hour later. So you're basically jet lagging yourself every night. It is obvious you can either completely stop looking at devices or you can just wear blue blocking glasses. They're very effective. That's what I do. It's $10. You look like an idiot, but I get to sleep very well, so I use them. Sleep in a cool, dark, quiet room. Set your circadian rhythm in your biological clock, which means really getting up, trying to get sunlight exposure within 60 minutes of waking up, and then also seeing sunlight when you go to bed is also helpful. Try and wake up around the same time every day instead of shifting your sleep-wake cycles. That seems to be also a very important, nuanced but important point to healthy sleep cycles. And there was something else. If you are outside all the time, so construction workers, whatever, if you're outside and you get plenty of natural sunlight all day, doesn't really matter if you're looking at bright lights at night, because that sun is so bright that when you are the relative brightness the phone has, it's not going to affect you. That sunlight has already set your circadian rhythm. This thing is not nearly as bright as the sun, so it's not going to alter or affect your rhythms. But most of us are not outside all the time, so keep that in mind. This is probably the most effective strategy for reducing PFAS, blood donations. Australia, they looked at over 300 firefighters. They had a group donate whole blood, a group donate plasma, and one that did not donate for the entire year. So both of the blood donation groups had a significant reduction in their blood. Plasma seemed to be a little bit more efficient. So they did find that PFAS was in the plasma serum, concentrated a little bit more. And also you can donate plasma more frequently. So it might've been a little bit of a combination that you could donate plasma more frequently and the PFAS was a little bit more concentrated in there. But both of them are, again, very viable strategies. Definitely recommend to donate blood to try and bring your PFAS levels down.
You're just giving it to somebody else.
Yeah, so that's always what comes up. That is,
Is there a way to do that?
so I'll walk you through the moral landscape of this. Dialysis, yes. So when this study was actually presented a few years ago, that was kind of a topic, was don't just start a blood drive for the community to give them blood. Intentionally is like a first responder. Oh, the first responders are donating blood for a good cause when you're really just trying to get your PFAS levels down. But at the end of the day, when you go and you're donating blood, most of the time it's used for emergencies, right? Like you're giving somebody blood that is going to have a partial amount of your total PFAS exposure, and life over limb, right? If they need blood, there's a problem. So just giving them a little bit of PFAS, I don't have a moral problem with that. And also we need to realize that everybody has levels of PFAS in their bloodstream. Firefighters do occupationally have more PFAS than other people, general pop. But we also see military has actually a higher level of PFAS than first responders typically do. And yeah, and it was interior construction, something with
There you go, you were fucking.
lines and wires.
I didn't want to check my PFAS.
Which brings us to the next topic. So checking your PFAS. You can do this through Quest and also through this company. I did them, Empower DX, $250. So it's not cheap, but I'm a dork, so I had to do this. And they send it to this one in particular. This company, they mail you the product. You poke your finger just like a diabetes for a blood sugar check, and you do have to squeeze a ton of blood out. So don't do it by yourself. You have to have somebody, because I was out. My finger was like dry. My girlfriend was milking the hell out of my finger. And I think we filled up like 6 or 8 Q-tips full of blood. Yeah, it was a lot. I was actually surprised at how much they required for that. But so my levels came back at 3. Typically anything above 5-ish, I believe that's starting to get into that danger zone. So I would like to continue to donate and stuff, but I need to be better about it. I used to be a little more on top of it. But I also follow and do all of these things that I'm talking to you guys and giving you advice on, as I've been doing this stuff for a long time. So firefighter, fireground job assignments and strategies for exposure, sorry. So obviously the attack and search crew, they're gonna have much greater levels of exposure, dermal absorption specifically, because you're going inside. We see that really the hazard is from the smoke. So if you're in a bunch of dark, dense smoke, that is the contamination. It's not necessarily the heat, it's not the fire itself, it is the smoke that has all the particulates. Higher levels of pH up to 5.6 times higher on average in the interior attack crew. And then we also see that ventilation, even these guys, they're having an increase in 1.4-fold and overhaul as well. So again, this is kind of painting the picture, continuing to paint the picture that dermal absorption is an important contributor in firefighter exposures, because all these guys are on air. So obviously it's not just an inhalation hazard, or it's not an inhalation hazard when they're in overhaul, not really in the thick of it like the fire attack crew, but they're still getting some levels of exposure, just not as much as the guys that were in the smoke. This is really cool, in my opinion. So transitional attack versus offensive attack. They also looked at this within this study. They saw that the transitional attack group, they had a 20 to 50% lower level of different pHs. in particular, the most toxic PAH was the 50%. So they had the biggest reduction in the most toxic PAH when doing a transitional attack. So obviously it's not always a possibility to do that. And some of the background on this, they're not really sure how it's happening. It's not changing the total airborne contamination in the room. What appears to be occurring is the composition and the physical state of the particle is changing. So the combustion byproduct itself is affected when you cool the environment. So cooling the particle is changing the particle phase, the what phase it's in, which can then help your bunker gear actually protect you. So you're increasing the efficiency of the bunker gear by cooling the atmosphere down. So practicality-wise with this, sometimes you can do a transition attack, sometimes you can't. If you see a fire, you see flames, okay, we can hit it from the outside while we're setting up, doing other stuff, whatever. But another aspect of this is, if you're already inside the structure, you have a room and contents fire or something like that, we can, and it's not, totally banked out, you can kind of see how that is almost a self-isolation of the hazards, right? If we have a room and contents, there's a ton of smoke and heat in that room, but it hasn't really gotten into the rest of the house yet, we can kind of treat that as a transitional attack. You or cool the door down, open the door, cool the rest of the room down. You don't have to necessarily be in it as much as possible, right? So we can kind of take the strategy and think our way through it. They're like, all right, our real risks are going and exposing ourselves to a ton of smoke and particulate. So what are the tactics that we can kind of use to try and avoid those things? Ventilation, transitional, and then as far as the flowing and going and things of that nature, we're doing multiple things at the same time, right? If you have the water source, you're cooling the atmosphere, which is helping to protect us. You're cooling the atmosphere, which is helping to protect any kind of victim. And then you're also cooling the atmosphere and the walls that are absorbing all the heat, the roof, etc. You're cooling that down to try and reduce flashover. So to me, as long as you have the water available and you can do it, flow and go and do all these things to try and cool everything down. I know that's not how we used to approach things. It was don't spray anything until you see the red stuff, traditionally. But I think with the combination of all this information, it makes a lot of sense to kind of do strategies like this to try and cool the environment. Technology, obviously, if we can improve technology, we can try and prevent other fires. We can have better responses. We can try and reduce our exposure rates. There's even stuff like ice grenades or something where you throw a bomb into a house and it's like an ice bomb and it explodes and cools the house off. You know about that, right? He watches a ton of Instagram videos because he runs our social media account, so he knows a ton about firefighting that I don't even know.
Also dealt in the military, but
Oh, okay.
it's basically a grenade with a pressure sensor on it. So when it explodes, whatever type of grenade it is, it puts out the fire. However it is, there's ice, there's foam, there's one that just does like a wave of just air. It depends on whatever.
So different extinguishing mechanisms. So anyways, technology's crazy. So summary with this. This is our entirety of cancer risk reduction strategies. Don your SCBA quickly and often. Use a half mask if needed. Gross technical decon. Wash your hands. Sweat any way possible. On the sweat thing, touch on it very briefly. If you're sweating if you have a structure fire, it might be beneficial to try and do this sweating protocol the next day, right? I don't want to exacerbate dehydration and then you guys get something else or have another serious call that you're smoked. So it might be a better idea to save that strategy for the off day. Improve your nutrition, definitely increase your fiber, use citrus marinade, improve sleep, allow gear to off gas effectively. You guys do a pretty good job of that. Clean apparatus, wash the bunker gear, reduce unnecessary time spent in your gear, utilize sunscreen, reduce microplastic and PFAS in your environment. Transitional attacks when feasible. Throw out your station wear if it's worn under a bunker gear after a fire, and you can. Donate blood serum often, and improvement in technologies. So that concludes the cancer portion stuff. This is the shorter presentation aspect with the overexertion and strain. We'll just jump into it. So strain in firefighters, this is, I don't know, did we talk about this with you guys coming in? So this whole presentation is basically chronic. What's the number one chronic killer of firefighters? What's the number one acute killer of firefighters? This is the number one acute killer of firefighters. So overexertion leading to heart attacks. we see that the USFA collected data for 20 years on firefighters. 1,096 out of almost 2,600 total line of duty deaths were caused from overexertion. So that's 42% of these deaths. The vast majority of them are resulting in a heart attack, 90% of them. NFPA, more firefighters die or are injured from heat stress due to inadequate metabolic heat dissipation than from environmental heat exposure in the line of duty. So it's not necessarily the ambient temperature that's killing you, it is the high body temperature and metabolic exhaustion that you're experiencing that is then causing a heart attack in the fire or outside of the fire on the way home. 96 deaths since 2022, and this is the highest since 2013. So these numbers, again, are actually trending the opposite direction. We're not seeing improvements in this category. So 51% of line of duty deaths in 2022 were from overexertion. This is all those numbers in a pie chart and a bar graph. What was it they saw the other day?
Normal station duty.
Yeah, the normal station duty deaths. I don't know what that's from, but these guys have apparently dangerous mop buckets or something. 15% of them. So, yeah, I don't know. The red part on the pie chart, I don't know. You have EMS is 4%, and normal station duties is 15. So something is going on somewhere that I'm unaware of.
Might be random things.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows? Stepping out of a truck is actually semi-dangerous. I got your back, dude. I got your back.
Disappeared.
Well, it disappeared today again.
So this is an older study, but basically I just brought it in here to show that when these heart attacks were occurring, suppressing a fire was 32% of them. So the vast majority of these overexertion leading to heart attacks are occurring on the fire ground. 17% of them were occurring on the way back. And then for non-emergency duties versus fire suppression, we had a 12.1 to 136 times higher chance of having a heart attack comparatively. So, and then non-emergency duties versus physical training, 2.9 to 6.6 times as high. So physical training is not really something that I would be hesitant to do as far as preventing a heart attack on the fire ground or at the station. So this is some of the mechanisms behind the heart attack and the overexertion. If you guys are paramedics, you guys understand this better than I do. But we're seeing the heat stress increasing central blood volume, increasing left ventricular end diastolic volume, and pulmonary capillary wedge. Decreased plasma volume because of sweating, decreased stroke volume, increased blood viscosity, increased oxygen demand for the heart, pronounced activation of the sympathetic adrenal medullary axis, and increased blood pressure and heart rate. So all these things kind of combine together to give us that perfect heart attack. This graph illustrates this stuff. So on the far right-hand side here, we see stress is causing reactive oxygen species and also TNFA alpha. So TNFA alpha is an inflammatory marker. And then these things chronically over time can help to develop plaque in the arteries, which is obviously going to reduce our blood flow. So we see firefighters are going to have our specific stressors, the hazardous exposures we talked about ad nauseum, chronic sleep loss, psychological stress, the cardiovascular strain, metabolic fatigue, the thermal regulatory challenge, which we'll touch on more here. So having having the elevated core temperatures and what that kind of does, dehydration. And then we have the individual characteristics. How old are you? What's your cardiorespiratory fitness? We're also going to touch on that. Dietary habits, gender, obesity, and your activity behaviors. Firefighter and heat stress. So obviously we're in a high temperature environment in a structure fire. We have heat that is being generated from our muscles. When our muscles work and they contract, that energy is being expelled via work and also via heat. So combining that with PPE, we're seeing obviously heat strain. So specifically PPE contributes to heat stress because of the low water permeability, the low water vapor permeability. So the ability for our sweat to leave through the bunker gear is lower than say if you're wearing a t-shirt. And we have high insulation also that's obviously keeping us protected from the thermal heat. So for when you wear PPE, you have an increase in a rate of heat storage for a given rate of heat production. So if you are generating whatever amount of body heat you're generating, When you jump in bunker gear, obviously your body's not able to release that heat into the environment as easily. And then we have if you're wearing PPE, the increase in metabolic heat production for a given amount of work compared to not being in PPE. So if we're digging a ditch, I don't need to tell you guys, if you're doing that in a set of bunker gear compared to t-shirts and shorts, completely different metabolic demands. It is way harder to do anything in bunker gear, relatively speaking. Whatever your fitness levels are, you could be the fittest man on earth. It's harder for you to dig a ditch in bunker gear than it is for you to dig in a t-shirt. So obviously everybody knows that, but painting a picture. So specific heat stress. In the literature, this is called uncompensable heat stress. That's what you get when you wear bunker gear. So it is the body's inability to release this heat, which puts you in a state of continuous heat gain. So you're wearing the bunker gear, you're working, you're in a high ambient temperature, you're experiencing heat gain, and then you're going to continue to experience heat gain until you cool the environment down, get out of your gear, or leave the scene, whatever. Your body temperature is just going to continue to elevate eventually. So that's what we call uncompensable heat stress. So this is always this one's always my most popular slide. So Dodgeball, obviously, great movie. Being overweight. So 75% of firefighters are classified as overweight or obese. These numbers, again, are coming from a BMI chart. On a BMI chart, I'm obese. So there's plenty of firefighters that are not actually obese, but we're using these BMI numbers. But the point still remains. So obesity, we are going to have elevations of cardiovascular disease from 1.5 to 6.6 times higher. And then obesity is also associated with lower levels of cardiorespiratory fitness. We're going to touch on why that's very important here in a second. And then also high levels of body fat actually experience lower heat tolerance. So if we're in a cool atmosphere or you're like up in Alaska, your body heat serves to keep you warm. Well, it's the exact same thing down here. You're super hot. We're in a high ambient temperature. We're not able to release heat. The fat is actually going to increase that storage and not allow us to cool down. So mental strain from heat and overexertion. Rapid heat stress and resulting increase in physiological strain causes decrease in cognitive control that could result in serious consequences in life-saving occupations that require contemplative, effortful decision-making. So what they looked at here was they got firefighters on a treadmill. They did whatever the set exercise was, and then they did the same thing, but they did it in gear. So in gear, they got their temperatures up to 103.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and then they, after each of the exercises, they basically put them through a go, no-go cognitive task. I'm not exactly sure what the tasks were. They didn't go over that in the study from my memory, but they saw a much higher increase in incorrect responses when the firefighters were in gear relative to when they were not in gear. So obviously the body heat and the exhaustion causes us to have inability to process things mentally the same way that we would if we were not exhausted. And basically they're just seeing a reduced cognitive function and memory from the theta part of, from the front part of the brain. So dehydration, minor levels of hypohydration can significantly impair exercise tolerance in uncompensable heat stress at any exercise intensity. So whether it's low intensity or heavy exercise, you're going to be compromised if you're dehydrated. They saw a 1%, you can see a 1% reduction in body weight causing a reduction in cognitive performance, 2% causing a reduction in physical performance. So it's not a whole lot. Some of our strategies: stay hydrated. Come to work hydrated, drink electrolytes, have electrolytes available after fires. Obviously, IV bag shortage, it is a viable alternative strategy if it's there. Weigh firefighters before and after. If you know you're going to go training, you can hop on the scale, see what you weigh before, replace that fluid that you lost after the training evolution. Definitely replace it at least with sodium, fluids, and a little bit of carbohydrates, 10 to 20 grams. That helps increase the efficiency of the process. If you can get potassium and magnesium, even better. The Galpin equation, this is like a little hack that you can use. So take your body weight and divide it by 30. That's about the number of ounces you would want to ingest every 15, 20 minutes while you're exercising. So just a couple little hacks here. So if you're 180 pounds, 6 ounces of fluid every 20 minutes should be decent. General physical fitness. So this is where we get into some of the cardiorespiratory and aerobic demands. High VO2 max. So a VO2 max is how much oxygen you can utilize during exercise. Do you guys do the life extensions thing? Is that what? Okay. Or not life extensions, life scan?
Yes.
So they do the VO2 max testing with the EKG. You get on the treadmill and run.
We do that, but they only do.
Do you look at the rhythms?
Heart rate.
So I thought they should be able to.
When we got hired, I feel like we. But it's
It's.
based on what you're paying for now, so.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
They only do just the heart rate.
And we don't have LifeScan. It's another company. It's
Oh, similar. Okay, gotcha. Well, you don't even need anybody to do this. Like the WFI at Cape, we do this with guys. You basically hop on a treadmill, put in some numbers like their body weight, age, et cetera, and then you can kind of generate a number by how far they run, whatever. There is a protocol, but you can pull them up if you guys would want to do that. But essentially, that's looking at how much oxygen you utilize during maximal exercise. Okay, so all of these studies that we're looking at are going to be looking at VO2 max. We see that VO2 max is definitely the most transferable physiological quality. So if we're going to look at something like absolute strength, muscular size, aerobic capacity, endurance, whatever it is, you can do all of these tests. It seems that VO2 max does really translate very, very well to firefighter performance. So like we said, it's assumed to be the most important prereq for a good firefighter and good performance. And it can reduce your average heart rate during fireground operations and also improve or reduce your recovery time going to the next scenario or the next fire. Athletes with high aerobic fitness, they can acclimatize to heat faster. So you're going to exhibit partial heat acclimation just from the act of exercising. When you get your core body temperature up, you're doing basically like a minor level of stressor getting used to having a higher body heat or some kind of heat acclimation. So they also lose adaptation slower. So if they're inactive in a cool environment, they're not doing heat acclimation training anymore, they're not really working out, they're still going to maintain that heat adaptation longer than an athlete with a low VO2 max. So flashover studies. This was done in Germany on 16 firefighters that were career guys. The average of the experience was 10 years. So there were some newer guys, some older guys, a pretty wide range of candidates to use. They looked at their VO2 max, their lactate threshold, and they tested their maximal strength. So during the flashover training, this had a ladder climb combined with a hose management, moving the hose through 5 different rooms and having 5 different fires with 2 unexpected flashovers. So it was like I want to say it was like a 10 or 13 minute scenario for most of the guys. So it was a hard training evolution. And we can see that play out here with their average heart rate. So it was around 15 minutes, sorry. So the firefighters' average heart rate throughout it was 85% plus or minus 5. This is aerobic, anaerobic, it's hard work. Like these guys they're definitely working. 90 to 95% heart rate max during a third of the training evolution. This was at the end of the evolution, the last third. They were a little bit higher, like we said, 90 to 95%. That is anaerobic work and it's very hard. So these dudes are busting ass. Final 4 minutes, 95% on average or above. That's maximal work. These guys are the very end of the scenario. Some of these dudes were redlining. So looking at our VO2 maxes here, they broke this up because they were showing you the average heart rates for all of the firefighters combined. This is splitting the firefighters up into 2 groups. What were the heart rates for the firefighters that were in worse shape and the firefighters in better shape? So under 46 milliliters per minute of oxygen per kilogram for VO2 max compared to guys that were over 46. The guys that were under had a 97.5% heart rate max average, while the guys that were in better shape had a 91.5% heart rate max on average. It's only 6%, right? It's not that big a deal. But what we see here from other studies is heat exhaustion occurred after crossing 96%, or I'm sorry, exhaustion occurred after crossing 96%. So that leads to significant declines in stroke volume of 15 to 26%. That's huge. That's a vast reduction in blood flow. And then cardiac output was 5 to 10% reduced, and along with increase in mean arterial pressure. So these things are what we're going to aim to try and reduce from the combination of heat stress and not being physically fit, because this can cause a heart attack. This is where those numbers and the overexertions are coming from, is the combination of all of these things. So the recommendations were obviously to have a good VO2 max. above 46 was their recommendations. I think the NFPA WFI is like 45, so they're somewhere always around there. And then most of these systems are probably going to be on like a 10% error rate. So if you're at 45, you might really be at 40, right? You might really be at 50. But if we're in the ballpark of there, it helps to try and obviously be as high as possible. So good anaerobic metabolism as well, not just the VO2 max, but all of these are going to combine to help reduce your heart rate below 96% and the ability to work in these specific intensity zones. So what we saw there was basically baseline. These guys were like 80%, 85% of their maximal heart rate. That's pretty high. That's not a low intensity workout. That is immediately starting off at like moderate intensity, and it exceeds up into the highest maximal intensity by the end of the scenario. So doing these things where you're training your heart rate to really be as high as possible, sustain that during work, and then allow it to drop back down and recover, and then going and repeating that again. So if we're doing 4, 5, 6, 10 bouts of these 1 minutes to 4 minutes of maximal exertion work, by the end of it, you should be on the ground breathing as hard as possible and just begging for forgiveness. So that is the most effective way to increase your VO2 max, is things like mile repeats. You're running for, a fast mile. I don't run a fast mile, but if someone were to run a fast mile, that might be 5, 6 minutes of work, 7 minutes of work, and then they rest the same amount of time, do it again. So you're doing some kind of physical activity for as little as about a minute and up to 4, 5, 6 minutes, whatever it is, going as hard as you can, okay? And these energy systems are never on and off. It's not a light switch. Your aerobic metabolism and your anaerobic metabolism, so that's without oxygen, both of them are working at all times. So it's not like we're just training one energy system, you're training all of them. But what's the most effective way of increasing our VO2 max? It seems to be what we recommended here. So general heat adaptation, you can get that within 7 to 10 days of heat exposure. And then you're actually gonna get 66 to 75% of those adaptations within 4 to 6 days. So that's actually pretty quickly. If you're looking at some kind of a physiological adaptation, you can gain these fairly fast. The intensity, anywhere for 50% of your VO2 max for an hour, up to 75% of your VO2 max for 30 minutes. So the harder you're training in this hot environment, the less time you need to be doing it. The less the intensity, the little bit longer duration you need. And then we maintain these adaptations for up to a month, which again is also a fairly long time. These are some of the adaptations you would see physiologically if you were looking at it on a chart. We're going to see improved sweating, reduced core temperature, reduced skin temperature, improved skin blood flow, improved fluid balance, which is huge. Lowered heart rate, again, huge. Stroke volume is increased. All of these things are super important in making, these are the physical and physiological adaptations the body makes when we do these kinds of physical fitness and heat adaptations. So the uncompensable, it took me so long to learn how to say this word, uncompensable heat adaptations, they're a little bit different than the general acclimation. It's not a ton different, and there is some overlap, but having general heat acclimation will improve your uncompensable heat stress. So starting off at the base level of fitness, just getting generally heat acclimated, going out, working outside, doing CrossFit workouts in the bay or whatever we're doing, just being exposed to general heat. That will improve your uncompensable heat stress. Chronic aerobic fitness, not the VO2 max per se. So I know we just talked a ton about VO2 max itself, but actually just working out and doing any kind of workouts in an uncompensable environment is going to help train that quality. So starting off, like I said, try and do some kind of general acclimation, and then you can make it harder and harder, progressively increase that heat and that work stimulus until you get to something what would mimic like the bunker gear or normal bunker gear, where you're training, doing job-specific stuff, getting as hot as possible, even going into live burns. Like that is the most specific physiological training that you can do as a firefighter for heat adaptation. But I think I have that in here. Yeah, so that leads us to the time spent for these training modalities. Your base is always going to be your general level of physical fitness, your aerobic fitness, your anaerobic fitness. That is the majority of time you should be spent doing that, not in gear, just getting a good foundation and being fit. General heat acclimation will be on top. So then we start throwing in, like I said, working out in the bay, doing things or if you have a temperature controlled environment, like an inside gym, like we have that at Cape, some of the guys turn the heat up in there. So things like that, you can kind of think outside the box. How can we increase our general heat acclimation? And then obviously full gear on air, that is going to mimic the most job specific, sport specific replica of for a firefighter and their demands. But we don't need to do that every single day. So our risk reduction strategies: be hydrated, stay hydrated, have high levels of physical fitness, and have the ability to push your heart rate high and then be able to recover from that. Reduce levels of body fat, have general heat acclimations, and then train and aim for some uncompensable heat acclimations. And then this is actually what I was referring to earlier. So this is just my general advice to guys. So if we're training on shift, I prefer to do some kind of lower intensity or moderate intensity stuff, just general aerobic fitness type things, stretching, maybe some bodybuilding stuff, nothing too crazy. Nothing too taxing. You could even do strength training, hypertrophy, power training, whatever. All of these things that'll fall under these categories. But basically, we're just trying not to push ourselves too terribly hard. Keep the heart rate at a manageable zone, so 60 to 75%. And then on our off days is when we could really lay the hammer down. That would be when we would do some of these VO2 max trainings, the interval trainings, going as hard as you can, pushing to failure, doing as many rounds as possible if you do CrossFit stuff. And then really pushing the heart rate. So that's when we're trying to go to 75 to 100% max heart rate for whatever workout or designated periods of training you want to do. Go to failure, and then one thing I did see is you could do like a full gear training circuit in the morning coming off shift, whether you are still on shift or just about to have gotten off and somebody else replaces you. That's been suggested to me because then you have the most amount of time to recover before the next shift. You're already here. You kind of get it done in the morning before you go home and go back to your normal responsibilities. So that is also an option. And that's it, guys. So there is my email, my personal number. So if you guys want to contact me, please feel free. Chief has my info as well. And then I did give him our slideshow. So you guys are more than welcome to scroll through the 70 citations or whatever it is that's in there, because I know you want to go read more about this stuff. You guys have any questions on anything? Perfect.